All right, good day, everyone. Grace and peace be unto you. I'm excited to join in today as we are in our village talk. And today's topic is New Jersey education, disparity, correctives, and restorative justice. I am Reverend John H. Campbell Jr., and I have the pleasure of being the moderator of this discussion today with these dynamic drum majors of justice. What we'll do today, we'll just start by introducing ourselves, and then we'll take the conversation from there. So I guess I'll get started as the moderator of this conversation. I'm John Gamble, the pastor of the Smyrna Missionary Baptist Church in the city of Newark, also the moderator of the North Jersey District Missionary Baptist Association, which is a conglomerate of about 50 churches across 6 counties in the state of New Jersey. But the lens I've really come with today is as an educator. I'm a 25-year educator, started out as a middle school math teacher in the city of Newark, then moved on to Plainfield, where I was a middle school and elementary math and ELA teacher. From there, I became a literacy coach, vice principal, then went to South Jersey to the West Hampton Township, where I was the director of curriculum and instruction. Came back up to the city of Newark, where I've been for the last 13 years as a principal of various configurations of a charter school, Marion P. Thomas Charter School, the largest Black-led charter school in the state. Currently, I serve as the director of curriculum and instruction there. So my lens, I've worked in traditional public schools. I'm working in a charter school right now. And I'm Catholic school educated K-12, but then my children are public school educated. So I've seen it as a parent in both worlds. I've seen it as an educator in both worlds. So I've come to moderate and ask the tough questions and have a little fun with this thing we call education, but also to raise awareness and, challenge, speak truth to power about some things that we really need to have real discussions about. So I'm going to just fall back and let's just kind of let it popcorn. Whoever feels led to kind of jump in and introduce themselves, let's go.
Well, I'll begin. I'm Pamela Powell. I'm a member of Calvary Baptist Church here in the city of Paterson. I come to you tonight as an educator as well. I started my career after leaving corporate, working in corporate field for 15 years. I went into education, started in an alternative school, went on to be a business teacher, a supervisor of business, went on to be a principal, chief of staff for the district, Paterson Public School District. I am now a principal of a K-5 school. So I have a very broad lens as well, and I'm honored to be here tonight with all of you. Certainly, Dr. Glover, thank you for including me in this wonderful lineup that you have as we discuss and really deal with some of the challenges of our Black and Brown young people in terms of them being able to close the achievement gap. So that's who I am, and I look forward to gleaning from you all.
Samaj Van Zant, and I'm currently the pastor of Second Baptist Church in Asbury Park. I born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, born into a family of educators that from 2 generations before me, all of them been educators and administrators in the New Orleans public school system. And even now, my mother, after moving to Houston, is still teaching kids because she just loves it. But I've been, since my time there, I started early working and really advocating for the justice of youth and education as a youth representative for the city of New Orleans under Mark H. Morial, and have been working ever since then to really fight the fight of seeking ways to have equal education across the board, from my time in New York City to my time in Oklahoma City to now here in Asbury Park, right on the Jersey Shore. I've been advocating for youth for equality of quality education across the board, and finding ways in which the systems that are not broken but working the way that they're meant to work, that hoping to break the system that's working so that it works for the people that it's breaking. And so really enjoying just watching the transformation and really bringing light to different to policy and hoping to bring more people on board so that we can make a difference, because the youth are our future, right? And how we treat the youth is certainly indicative of how we think about our future and the legacy that we want to leave. So that's the fight I'm in. And of course, in ministry, I love the youth, invest a lot in youth to the best of my ability. And my wife and I co-founded an Inspired Life Camp to really Fine Arts and Technology Camp to help fill in the gap of educating that's not the academic curricula that they're so missing in schools. And so we do that during the breaks and really helps to stimulate youth. So any way that we can find ways to uplift and encourage and empower youth to go forward, and also hopefully help restore passion of educators to educate our youth is the fight and the talk and the conversation that I want to be a part of.
Pastor Van Zandt, I should tell you, I'm a graduate of Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
All right now. All right now. There you go.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Danielle Brown. I'm the senior pastor of the Shiloh Baptist Church in Plainfield, New Jersey. Prior to being in full-time ministry, I was an educator. I am a trained educator. That was my first career. And I'm currently rounding out a second term on the Board of Education in the city of Perth Amboy, New Jersey, which is my hometown. I believe that this work and conversations like this are incredibly important, because if we are not engaging in equality and the things that make for equality and justice in the lives of our kids early, then they will be exposed to and experience the things that put them behind perpetually. But if we can engage in these conversations and the work that we all do, all of my esteemed colleagues who are on this panel, the work that we are doing helps our kids to have a level playing field early on, so that as they get older, right, they're not as behind or what have you. So this is necessary conversation. Thank you, Dr. Glover, for the invitation and the opportunity to share in this dialogue with my colleagues as well.
Hello, I am Willie Dwayne Francois III, and a shout out to Samaj. I'm currently in your native city of New Orleans, so feeling that, loving that. I'm the pastor of the Mount Zion Baptist Church in Pleasantville, New Jersey, in the Pleasantville part of our state, Atlantic County. I also serve as the co-chair of the New Jersey Coalition Against Racial Exclusion, and one of our primary campaign efforts is to end a massive segregation here in our state, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about today. Issues of education equity, whether that is related to food, environmental injustice, environmental racism that exists in our schools, by how the infrastructure has been perpetuated or unkept, to issues of curricular concern, are things that bring me to this work. So I do this work as a commitment to my own faith practices and faith commitment, as someone who believes in anti-racism, someone who believes in anti-classism, someone who believes in anti-patriarchy, and all of the ways that those isms show up in our classrooms and condemn so many children to lives of poverty and the like. So I'm excited to be here. And since Dr. Gamble did let me introduce myself, I think I should say that this week I released a book through Brazos Press entitled Silencing White Noise: 6 Practices for Overcoming Our Inaction on Race. And the book actually draws from my community organizing experiences around education equity. So excited to be here and really humbled to be with such a great cadre of leaders in our state.
Wonderful.
This is awesome. This is awesome. And I thank you, Dr. Glover, for pulling us all together. I'm excited about what I'm going to learn through this space and this experience. So yeah, let's jump in. I think we can jump in right there. As I was thinking about where to start, I thought of two key landmark decisions that I think definitely impact how we view education and how we view race in society. So that's 1864, Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. And then 1954, when we get into education, Brown versus Board, where the decision to segregate children was rendered unconstitutional. So just kind of thinking of those two kind of key landmark decisions, they are played around a lot within education. They're played around a lot within issues of justice. They always come up regardless of where you fall. But with this particular panel, when you look at our schools, do we look more like 1896 or do we look more like the spirit of 1954? Let's start with Francois. Jump in there.
Yeah, so 68 years after the Brown decision, which was intended to help with the desegregation of schools, what we find in that in a state as progressive as ours, in a state as wealthy as ours, in a state that boasts to be number one in public education in the nation, what we find is that that number one education is not accessible by large communities of Black and Brown and working class white children here in our state. Yes, we can say we're number one in education outcomes, and how that is defined, I think, is also skewed in a lot of ways. But we have to also be clear that we are number 6 in terms of segregation along the lines of race for Black students, and number 7 along the lines of race for Latinx students. And what we know for sure is that segregation in schools, regardless of how we think about our post-Brown life, it does diminish so many life opportunities for those students. In a very real sense, segregation is a way that we predict life outcomes. It is a way that we predict economic thresholds. It is a way that we sort of predict how people transition in and out of this suction machine that we now call mass incarceration. It is really another indicator for how our schools look more like prison preparatory academies than they actually do sanctuaries of creativity, learning, and joy, which children should have access to. And so to answer the question directly, New Jersey looks more like Plessy than it does look like Brown because of political ill will, because of policy designs that have allowed white flight and middle class flight, that have left Black and Brown and poor white children in divested, abandoned communities that have higher health problems. These communities that we often call food deserts, but really we should call them food apartheids, because deserts are natural, but apartheid is based on policy, and there's nothing natural. Contrary to how we think about people live in groups, there's really nothing natural about the powerlessness and concentrated poverty that exists as a result of our housing segregation problem and our school segregation problem.
Anyone want to jump in? Jump in. Let me call on Powell. You're on the inside like me. Let's talk a little bit about it. How do you see it as a urban educator? Do you see it the same way? How do you look at it?
Well, I think when we look at what we just went through with COVID, I think it raises some of the points that the brother just made in terms of our young people not having what they really need to have in order to be successful. Food was a big issue. And we as a district had to make sure that our young babies were fed during this pandemic. So we're still moving in that same fashion in which our young people are not, don't really have everything that they need to have in order for them to be successful. The pandemic, I think, pushed us back in terms of it widened the achievement gap for us. And now for the next, I would estimate, and I could be wrong, the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to be catching up from just where we were with the pandemic. So again, we're not where we need to be, obviously. And I think a lot of the points that he brought up in terms of the gap, that's where we are.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, just to throw a nugget out there, and then we can kind of keep reacting on it. I think when we just look at even the pandemic and children being cut out of school and not being able to attend, in the suburbs, it's well known and documented that there were families that were able to hire tutors to supplement the virtual instruction. Whereas we know in more urban settings, right, or particularly the parents of Black and brown children, some of them could not even take off of work. They still operated under the threat of fire, being fired, of being terminated if they missed work. So they couldn't even be there to guarantee that their children were online. So that just further exasperates some of the conversation that we're having. And that was seen across traditional public schools as well as charter public schools, no exempt, right? Because most charter schools are serving similar populations to the traditional schools, but those parents were experiencing the same type of stressors. So let me jump out here with this. Since it looks more like Plessy versus Ferguson, which talks about separate but equal, are we using the right word when we use equal? That's a big question in education right now. When you say equality between Black and brown children versus white children, is equality the right word? Because I heard the word, I've heard equality, I've heard the word equity. So let's kind of play around with those words here and kind of get a sense of if we could come together on a kind of a consensus on what's the definition of the two, and are they the same thing or not? Van Zandt, I think I saw you come off mute. Let's jump in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there has to be both, that policies and treatment have to be done, so have to be applied equally. And I think we ought to do in the application of it has to be done with equity. And so I don't think that you can throw, either one of those words to the side, but we need both of them. And when we look at the school systems and we look at the way that children are being educated, that one of the things that is absolutely evident, and so just let me use this as an example. In this Inspire Life summer camp that we're running, we have children from all socioeconomic statuses, very diverse, racially, and in every type of way that almost every type of way that diversity can be said. And you can tell just by the interaction of the kids when they're engaging in the STEAM activities, some of the ways that they approach problem solving with projects, or the way that they have not been, that some have been given, that some have access to resources and tutors, as you were mentioning, and others simply just do not. And that this, as was mentioned, this pandemic has affected one group of youth more than it has affected another group of youth. And it has nothing. And so we need to, and so really the fight is, how do we erase these barriers? How do we erase the policies that are in place? How do we tear down the system that is currently working to keep certain groups uneducated or undereducated? And how do we put everybody on the same plane to say that whether you're the child of parents who are well off and have access to resources, or whether you're the parent, whether you're the child of a single parent living in the projects that's unemployed or underemployed, that you are still getting the same level of education. And of course, we know that race plays a huge part in this. We know that economics plays a huge part of this. And so that's really where I think the focus needs to be, right? That we need to have that everybody needs to be treated as equal on a policy level, and then the application of it needs to be done so with equity, that despite any type of difference that a child may have, that they're still getting the same quality education. And I sincerely believe from the depths of my heart that these policies, that these systems, these are in place because that one group knows that if another group would have equal access and given equal access to equal level quality of education, that they would exceed more than they would like them to. And so I definitely believe that things ought to be equal and applied with equity.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also think that equality and equity are words that we use for lack of better ones, right? But really, the issue at hand is being just. Because from where I sit, I mean, what good is it, even talking about the pandemic, that our district was able to distribute 10,000 devices, but some of the kids didn't have Wi-Fi at home, right? So what good is it to have supplies, or I give you 5 apples and a kid in another district has 5 apples, but there are systemic issues that are surrounding you that the apples won't be enough in light of what is happening around the student. So I think that we've got to think about what is just in how we approach public education. But there's also this part, that in many of our Black and brown districts, when you look at the faculty and staff does not reflect the demographic of the student body. And it is not just for our kids also to not have representation. When studies show that Black students who have by 3rd grade a Black teacher, right, that those students are performing, I guess it was roughly 13% more likely to enroll in college or have, whether they go to college or not, better long-term outcomes professionally, emotionally, than students who do not. And so what do we say of students in our districts that we're saying, oh, well, separate but equal, and they're building new buildings in some of our lower income districts and all of these things. But what good is any of that if the system that is set around the students, right, it does not contribute to what is morally right and what is morally correct for them, that we still don't hire Black and brown teachers to teach the students. And we're still not addressing some of the broader systemic issues that make or apply pressure to our kids and ultimately impact their academic performance and their ability to learn in a least restrictive environment.
If I can just tack on to this, more than half of the teachers in our state are not just white, but actually white women. And that matters, right? Like the gender matters because of the politics around what it means to be a white woman in this country and in this state. And I think we need to be honest about that. But also the race. The race surely matters. And just to tack on to what Dr. Brown said is, like, yes, Black children need, Black and brown children need Black and brown teachers, but also white children need Black and brown teachers as well, because what we learn is that kind of access to the majority of white people in this country don't know Black people outside of the ones that work for them and the ones that serve them, not even the ones that work alongside them, but the ones that work for them in some sort of domestic capacity, or the ones that they find in some levels of work. And so limited access, the way that many white people are able to live in these silos of whiteness only perpetuate the stereotypes, the myths, the fears, the paranoia around Black flesh, right? And so if we really want to do the work of figuring out how do we develop cops that aren't afraid of Black bodies, how do we develop judges that have white judges that have a consciousness around how racism works, how do we get doctors that actually believe in the pain of Black women so that we don't have higher mortality rates during childbirth, right? And complications with pregnancy. If we really actually want to cure so many of these racial ills, these interpersonal racial ills, these individualized racial ills that have systemic implications, it may start with making sure white children have Black and brown teachers before they leave elementary school, before they enter middle school, before they leave middle school, before they leave high school, because one, studies say that it is better for their mental health to have that kind of exposure. And, and we can even think about that in terms of how the beauty of difference, makes you more comfortable with yourself, like being more comfortable with difference makes you comfortable with yourself, but also the sense of it, the potential for a person to be racist minimizes the more contact a person has with Black and brown folk, but also to learn the real history of this country that is primarily invested in race and class is also helpful. So we have to also think about how the lack of Black and brown teachers in classrooms and them being accessed by white students is a public health crisis, right? It is literally killing Black folk that white people don't have access, and white children don't have access to Black authority figures, particularly Black and brown teachers.
I think you raise an excellent point. And when I think about it, as we all know, there's a teacher crisis right now. And I think this type of forum is important so that people begin to understand the broader picture, and that we can begin to guide our young people into the teaching field. Right now, we're having problems, getting teachers.
Yes.
That's the reality. And and I think, again, this is wonderful, because I think as people begin to hear this, our call to action is to help people understand the importance of going into the field of education, because people are not going there now, and we're not paying our teachers, Black, brown. Right now, I don't know about you, brother, but I got some vacancies. And people, they're not, so what do we do to be proactive? Because again, I think understanding the importance and the impact, because this is what this is doing, right? So we're educating. Dr. Glover sent me so many articles here I thought I was back in school, but I learned something from that. Yeah. I did. Because we can't all profess to know we're in it and we're doing it and we're trying to help. But I think the key here is that people understand the impact and how systematically they're trying to suppress us. Okay, and it's good for us to have conversation. There has to be parental involvement. Parents have to be involved in the educational process. Teachers, principals, we cannot do it alone. We have to have parents that understand the impact and the importance. But a lot of our parents, I think Dr. Brown, you said it. I was running around giving hotspots to families because they didn't have internet. Yep. Okay, so they have the device, right? But they don't have the internet to use the device, nor I give them the hotspot. They don't know how to hook up to the hotspot. So now you have all the resources, but you don't know how to utilize all the resources because there's no one to guide you through that. So, I mean, it's broad. I think this is so rich, but as a principal, I have to, if I take it too broad, I won't be able to have the impact and challenge my teachers on my level. I have to give credit to the district. We're doing some stuff around equity and equality and understanding that. And we're working with teachers. They've been working with the principals, the vice principals. We're rolling out. Matter of fact, I'm making a presentation tomorrow on it, a piece of it, a very, very big push. But I had a teacher that came to me, and I was having a meeting about the equity, what have you, and she told me the only equity she knew about was the equity in her home. Now, when I mentioned that to someone, they were like, But, first of all, I had to create a culture that was safe enough for people to have the conversation, so that we can push them, so that they can learn. I think we have such a big push, but I believe that these type of conversations will help educate. And we have to push to hire Black teachers, because the Black teachers, a lot of them are out there, but we don't have enough of them.
Reverend Powell, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, because something was stirred in my spirit, but
I wanted to just kind of jump in on that point too, that there's this other issue in public education that is directly, I think, connected to this teacher shortage. And that is the way our unions operate.
Yeah, Lord. Oh, Lord.
Right. And so if we are loading all of the money, not we, the unions are loading all of the money at the top of the scale, which is largely white women of a certain age. And then we're saying, let's hire Black teachers. And so now you have a generation of people who are coming out of college with more student loan debt, right, than probably ever. And now we want to lowball them at the top, at the early part of the scale. But in our Black and brown districts, right, where primarily the people making the decisions are not Black nor brown, even in our unions, by the time, in order to get a significant step, you've got to be in the 4th or 5th year. But if I go to another district, right, that is not a Black or brown district, and you get a huge step between year 1 and year 2, which district do you think that I'm going to work for?
Absolutely.
Right. And so we've got to deal, this issue of injustice, of race, of inequality, of evil, because that's what it is so broad and deep and expansive. And you find it at every crevice of public education. And so with the teacher shortage, I think there's so many things that contribute to it, but for the teachers that are in this kind of exodus of educators that we're seeing, particularly in years 1 through 5, has to do with the ways that our unions operate, that the unions are not necessarily operating for Black and brown people fresh out of college in the ways that we would think. And maybe they've never, right? Maybe there's always been a history of racism there too. But it's not working in our favor, which ultimately ripple effects, right, is a domino effect. So now Black and brown people are looking into other career paths or other, methods to educate, but not necessarily in public education or what have you. But I think that is an important thing that also needs to be addressed, is the ways that the teacher, unions are functioning when they're determining salary scale.
I didn't even think to go there, Doc, which is like,
I know,
on the administrator end, we kind of can look like, yes, but
on the board end, you sit through
on the board end, right? So let me throw this in, because I think it also helps in terms of how, even how we define achievement. How do we define even, becoming a teacher? So, we don't like to talk about this, but a number of Black and brown aspirants for teaching walk away because of a 6-letter word, the praxis. Many have a desire to teach, but that test or a series of tests become a barrier, keeping them out of the field. The same way many of our children are measured and determined to not have knowledge or not be able to meet or exceed expectations based on one type of test. Standardized testing, which then also impacts funding formulas, which then impacts our children and keeps things segregated. So what does that look, how can we reimagine the profession if we are saying that we need more Black and brown teachers? What do you think, as a panel, what should then be the criteria besides a test, right? And I've seen enough teachers to know that they can pass that. I've seen some teachers pass that test and can't teach.
They can't teach.
So what at least at the foundation do you see from your lenses would help us get more Black and brown teachers in front of our children, so that you know, they can see people who look like them, and be exposed, and like I said, even those white communities get more of us in front of them, so that diversity can potentially happen. So what do we see? What does that look like?
I think one of the things has to, it's definitely what Dr. Brown was talking about, in that that the pay rate is the same in all of the different communities, right? Because that's a motivator, right? Where you work and how you can take care of your family, how you can take care of yourself. That's definitely going to be one of them. Another thing is, we know is to remove the standardized testing, right? Because we know standardized tests is geared towards a certain sector of the population. And so, and as you just alluded, as you just said, standard passing the test does not mean that you can apply and that you can actually help others gain that information that you can teach. And so we definitely need to do that. Another thought that I have and am working on in one way is the licensing of teachers, right? Whereas you don't get, it's not that you pass tests one time and all of a sudden you're in, but in the same way we got to renew our firearms permits, and the same way we got to renew license, our driver's license and things of that nature, that teachers have to continue to go through evaluations. It's not tests where they trying to sit down, filling in bubbles or what have you, but they have to go through evaluations to make sure that they are still being effective. Because I think part of I think a lot of what we're missing too is the effectiveness in education, right? And I mean, we have a lot of teachers in our congregation and folk who are on board with the NJEA, and they're always talking about new curriculums and new this and new that. It's like it's a constant turnover that the teachers are really not able to. And of course, as a parent of two young kids, this new math, whatever, that is just it's hard for the parent, but it's really this notion that that the effectiveness in education is really being lost. And so how do we and so I think part of it is to say is to find way, and I don't have the answer, but to find ways to maintain the passion for teaching. Because I think in this, that people get into it because they want to help the next generation. They want to teach, they want to educate. How to, and it's finding ways, one, of eliminating the standardized tests, but finding ways of evaluating teachers for their passion, for the effectiveness, that does not have to do with the students' test scores, because sometimes success or achievement can be a student that comes from a messed up household, right? That comes in that's couch surfing with their parents, that didn't eat because they live in a food apartheid, right? That is just making it to school, that all of a sudden that this student is doing a little bit better than they were, that their participation or that their attendance has improved. I think the metrics need to be changed for how we measure whether a teacher is being effective, because for those type of students, if they come to school more, and if they have a smile on their face and not depressed, or they, are starting to read at a better level than they were before, it may not be on par yet, but, so those type of things, I think if we can figure out how to change the metrics of teaching, and then find ways to evaluate teachers, not because they can pass a test, but because of their passion and their effectiveness for this craft, for this skill, for this, profession of teaching.
If I could jump in, I think one of the things, I think an effective teacher requires the ability to build relationships with their student. If you don't build relationships, when I challenge my teachers to take time to build relationships. I think you got to do that. And I also think that school has to be fun. It has to be fun. It has to be a place where kids want to go. And you have to think outside of the box in doing that. while you're trying to work within, Dr. Brown, you just took me to a whole nother level with what you shared, because I think it is on target. But right now, today, because I got babies right now, if I'm not going to change this, as you and I know, that if they are not reading by the 3rd grade, the likelihood of them being successful throughout their academic journey, it can be limited. I'm not saying that they can't turn around. So right now, when I go in on the 5th, I guess we start on the 5th, I don't have a lot of time for the kids right now today. Because in 3 years, if we don't do what we need to do, these kids are not going to be able to read. And so you're going to, and you can't teach somebody to I always drop the L-bomb on them, love our kids. You got to love, you have to deal with the whole child. You have to know your kids well enough to know that because I'm in the urban, sometimes there's shootings, and you have to be able to know and be able to understand that Johnny may have known a little boy that got shot, because this is our reality. This is what we're dealing with. So I think it's not just the testing and the, you have to be able to convey information, but we want our learners to be critical thinkers. It's nothing more exciting than to be in a classroom when you have young people challenging the teachers. And that's what I tell the students. You challenge your teacher. You be respectful, but you ask questions, because you push the child, you push the teacher. I think that's for me. And then you can get some teachers that are intimidated by that. So how do we, that's the, I don't know, that's it's not just the testing, obviously, that's important, but there's a whole nother piece, because if you can't love on our kids, because kids know whether you really are for them or if you're just putting on a front. Let me tell you, I know. And you can be hard with kids and they know that you love them, because you're not going to give them a break. And I say this because I turned around to high school, and I was a tough sister, but they knew I loved them. They knew that there was no doubt in their minds that I wanted the best for them, because again, I don't have time to play, because we have to produce young people that can compete. So I'll stop there.
One of the sins of public education, one of the sins of the state when it comes to public education, is that we do have standardized tests, but we don't have standardized resources. We don't have standardized compassion. We don't have standardized reparations of any sense. We don't have standardized accountability. We don't have standardized investments. We standardize things in ways that we can measure and control bodies, but not in ways that we really create pathways towards opportunity. And so we have, states have to figure out, particularly a state like ours, that wants to lift progressive bona fides, that wants to say we have the most progressive governor in the country. We have a civil rights governor. Well, how do we start to think about the standardization of things that actually make human life possible, that make human lives flourish, that give young people, young learners opportunities to flourish and to grow? So we have to have greater conversations around what are we standardizing? And are we standardizing as a way of creating barriers and creating pathways towards poverty and destruction? Or are we standardizing things that actually will make our economy stronger, make our democracy stronger, make our communities, our churches stronger? These are some of the questions that we have to wrestle with. And I think your question, Moderator Gamble, around equity versus equality, right? And I'm with Dr. Brown that the limits of language are going to always be real, but owning that, but seeing the difference between equity and equality as something processional. Like, we cannot get to equality if we have not attended to the things that make injustice real. In our state, right? It is actually an injustice to give every child the same thing when so many children are not at playing level, are not at playing field because of how systems and structures have taken things out of homes and taken things out of classrooms and taken things out of playgrounds, right? If we're not honest about the fact that our children are not on the same playing field because of systems and structures, if we only think about equality, then we will never attend to the fact that there are some people who actually need a little more because more was taken from them. More was denied from them. More what they were shut out of more. And so these conversations are important because it gives us an opportunity to name the fact that the children are not the problem. The teachers are not the problem. The administrators are not the problem. The parents are not the problem, right? But there is a problem of racism, classism, and all the other isms that are fortifying lack of opportunity, limited opportunities that impact real life. And so until we start to talk about the need that there are some families, some communities that do need more because more was taken from them, then we cannot really have a real sense of how we push this forward to actually being what it says it is on paper.
And I think going back to something Reverend Van Sant said, metrics. Public education in the last 20, I guess roughly 20 years, has dealt with a legislation that was horrible, No Child Left Behind Act, that in the procedures of it said, oh, be least restrictive, said freedom, said equality, but the standard, the metric by which it was progress in that system was measured was standardized, right? That even in all of this freedom and teaching kids in least restrictive environments, but they all have to now score the same thing. And so what did it do? Instead of public education teaching to the student, it began teaching to the test. Even the role of guidance counselors in our context, right? Guidance counselors went from counseling the whole student, right, to now pushing paper, that most of our guidance counselors are sitting and they're putting numbers together on spreadsheets around that standardized testing. And so I think that's also something that has to be dealt with nationwide, but also, you know, I mean, micro, we're all from New Jersey. And so the ways that it also impacts and informs how we're doing what we do. What Dr. Francois said about the racism and all of the isms, also at the policy level. One of the things that we did during the pandemic, because we, you know, in our district, we realized that no one had ever looked at our policies and procedures. And I asked a simple question once, who are we suspending, right? And why? But I really want to know who. And we are a 90% Black and brown district, right? But even with that, because of that fact, that, oh, well, we don't have issues of racism here. All of our students are about the same color. It was lies and fallacies, because once we went to the actual policies, student code of conduct, the language there was stifling. The policies were not sensitive culturally. And so we ended up doing a complete revamp of all of that. But at the highest levels, if we just left, I don't know if you were in there, Dr. Francois, but a forum with Bishop Leah Daughtry on voting rights and talking about getting more of us at the table, because there are things that other Black and brown people will be concerned about and sensitive to at the level of policy. That we've got to infiltrate even those spaces, that maybe if we work from the top down and grassroots, right, from the ground up, somewhere we can meet in the middle and have some progress, because we can do all of this work. But if the policies do not change, the policies that are suspending our kids, the policies that do not lend to restorative justice, that in our district, we were saying restorative justice, but on paper, that's not what it said. On paper, it wasn't that. And so you have to, right, abide, your procedures have to abide by the paper. And so I think that it's all of these things, and also mobilizing and starting kind of a leadership and civic engagement pipeline where we can get people who are thinking along the lines of justice and equity and equality at the level or at the table when policies are being written to push back at that level. But definitely this nation needs a complete review and overhaul of that No Child Left Behind Act, because a lot of what we're seeing, it perpetuated the systemic issues that we do see in public education in a lot of ways.
And I just want to jump into just offer that, because and just knowing how, at least at the district level, in some cases, how policy is formed to govern districts, that if we really did some analysis and just grabbed random policies from most districts, they look the same, because many of them are boilerplate policies for compliance. And so when do we go beyond compliance policies, the policies that's really going to change and transform the lives of children that are specific to their context and to what they're experiencing, and not just something to help us survive CUSAC if we're traditional, or performance frameworks if we're charter and all of that? When do we go beyond just the boilerplate policies that might very well perpetuate the very thing that we're trying to transform?
And most districts also do not have, which I think should be required in every district, is a anti-racism statement and policies that hold everyone to that standard of anti-racism. It's just not there.
And so there was a few things that kind of was like, because like I'm like on overload hearing all of this great stuff. I'm like taking notes. I got a whole thing I'm taking notes on, because y'all blessing my life. There are so many subtle things that hit our children and that make statements, particularly the Black and brown children, about their worth and their value. So I'm going to give you this, and I want us to mull over this and see if you see where I'm going. So during the pandemic, we talked about, food insecurity and the need to get our kids fed, right? But a lot of those kids, if you listen to them, said the quality of what was given to them severely dropped in the pandemic. It was free. They didn't have to do a lunch application, but the quality of what was given to them was so poor, they would rather not eat. So where do we how do we build in mechanisms for feedback that allow us to see if what we are doing is working, not just from a quantitative perspective, but from a qualitative perspective? Anyone can jump in on me. That's just where my head is right now.
Does that go back to what Reverend Powell said about relationship? Right? If you there's policy. So enacting the policy, carrying out policy says that kids get a sandwich on Thursday, right? And so everybody gets a turkey sandwich, but they don't tell you that the turkey is old and the bread is soggy. You don't know that until you engage in conversation, which is an element or outgrowth of relationship. So I'm not sure what that looks like, right? You maybe can't institutionalize, right, or policy out relationship, but it's through that now you hear the voices of children, pausing to ask. In every other sector of life, right, there are exit and entrance interviews. We don't ever ask our kids. When do we ever ask the children at the end of the year, right? We evaluate them, but do we give children an opportunity to now evaluate the systems that they are exposed to for 280 days or roughly 300 days out of a 365 day year? We never do that. We don't give the kids an opportunity to provide feedback.
Yeah, I want to just add another note to that, right? I love that, because one of the thoughts that came to my head was finding people who will listen, right? And creating a policy for listening to our youth. But also, I think it is stressing the vote, because most people, and I know this doesn't happen with administrators in the school system, but school board and those who have voice and can and ought to be given the voice of those whom they are elected to serve, right? That if we can stress the importance of voting, people who will listen and take the concerns of the children and the parents to the administrators in the school. And also, right, I think educating the parents to exercise their agency as parents in the school system. We see, down south and in some of these states where parents are outraged about CRT and all this other stuff that is just really, that is, I don't, yeah, they're voicing their opinions about that, right? And so they're saying all of these things, but Black and brown parents ought to know that they can do the same, that they can make sure that there is quality food, that they can make sure that there's, voice their opinion and really put pressure on these officials to say, listen, we want our children to have equal access. And no, you're not going to bust them across, to some other city, but we want that equal access, equal resources right here where we are. And so I think it has to be, definitely the push to vote the people in who will listen and voice the concerns, and then also educating parents that they have agency and that they have power to come together and to speak up and to say what is needed, and to let the kids know that they have the same thing. That they have a voice, that it matters. And that ought to be, as Dr. Brown talking about policy, we ought to make that a policy, right? That the kids' voice matters, right? It's not just, the teachers, not just administrators, but the kids' voice matters. And that we ought to make sure that those voices, those are considered equally with everybody else.
And you kind of sparked something with me. And I've noticed it in various districts, that when you come to the board, so Dr. Brown may, have a little insight in this and may have to clean this up for me. But I've noticed that the Board of Education is really the seasoning ground, the let me see what I can do to attain higher political aspirations. I go from the board, I go to council. If I do well on council, I run for mayor. If I do well, but we don't hold those same persons that used our educational system as a pathway to any level of accountability for education, though he voted them in to advocate for education. Is that just me, or does everyone else see that too?
There's that, Dr. Gamble, but then there's also that often our Board of Education elections are popularity contests. The city will remain nameless, but there is a city that just 4 years ago, maybe 90% of the board did not have a degree because there are no rules around that. And so how do you legislate and policy and hold, to the fire an educational system that you know nothing of? How? And so we've got to look at that too. And then which leads to another bigger problem. The average voter really doesn't know policy. The average voter does not know the platform of the person that they're being voted for. And so we do have that issue in our communities, whether it's at the school board level or the president of the United States. The average voter, we thank God for people casting votes, but how many actually can communicate and translate what policies and platforms of a candidate are? They largely are popularity contest, that whoever my people are going to go for is who I'm going to vote for, or whoever I know, my next door neighbor is running. And so because we, share a lawn guy, we're going to, I'm gonna vote for him and put his sign in my yard. So you're right. It becomes a stepping stone, but rarely even do people run for a Board of Education on a platform other than a catch term. I knew that when I ran, I wanted more Black and brown people being hired in our district, that I wanted policy and procedure around discipline to be different. I wanted to make sure that our kids were getting a high quality education and not just being passed through a system. And so I ran with those things in mind, and have pretty much, I think, held true to those. Of course, you get to the table and you see that there's so many other issues that are presenting a school board, but largely school boards are ill-equipped on the front end.
I mean, this is an incredibly important point because, I know a city where 100% of the school board has no college level education. Not just agree, they've not gone to college for anything. Right. And you really have to ask yourself the question, like, where is the expertise in running an educational system when you have not really engaged education on a level beyond high school? Right. How can I be a legislator for a local education or for a local district when, you know, I don't have a command of civics. I don't have a command of what a legislative branch in a particular government is supposed to do. There's still school districts where there's school board members who actually believe they run the day-to-day operations of a school, right? That gap in awareness around how one shows up in the job, I think it's rabid, and it is destroying so many lives of children. So there needs to be a kind of standardization of qualifications that must include, you know, a college degree, right? It must include some sort of relationship to education, some relationship to how a school functions, what a school is supposed to do. I know school board members who don't even have a philosophy or theory of education. Like, what is a school supposed to do is a question that can stump so many school board members that I know. And then to also be honest, in a state like New Jersey, where we are a small town state, right? We're a suburban small town state where you can actually stay on the school board cycle after cycle after cycle if you can guarantee 180 votes. Right? You now control the lives and the futures of families in New Jersey with 180 votes. There has to be a re-engagement and a reassessment of how one can become a school board member, but also how one remains on the school board. It shouldn't all be about politics, electoral politics, right? If you should probably be disqualified from running if you've not engaged in any continuing education, if you've not gone to any type of professional development, if you've not actually tried to learn the job, right? So I think there's some ways that we have to standardize what it means to become and what it means to remain a school board member, because education policy so often is in the hands of people who are just not currently equipped to handle the academic outcomes of children, which we know translate into economic outcomes, into health outcomes, right? Into family outcomes. Like, we have to take a little more care with what it means to run for that office.
Okay, can I even take what you said and take it even a step? You know, we got, you know, I agree. Board members need PD. Board members need to be educated. And I know Powell gonna you know, just key her up in C# D with this one, right? Board members need to step into school. How are you going to govern something you haven't even walked into?
Well, by law.
You could go to a back to school night.
We can't just show up in the school.
But a back to school night. I mean, there are some board members that they've never been to back to school nights. They've never been to a concert. They've never physically walked in the building. How do you know what's going on? I'm not talking about during the day, because I agree. There's a difference between governance and management. And I've seen governance become management and be a nightmare. But you can't govern an institution you won't even walk into. There are board members that don't even go to parent-teacher night for their kids, but they're making policy. So yeah, help me with that. That's what I say. Clean that up for me, Dr. Brown. Like how even something that, like, how do you approve a bill list, but when you don't even look at what's going in the building? That help me with that.
Well, I think that also the policies and procedures as they are written also are more given to a lack of accountability. so you have boards, right? And I won't say that every board is not functioning. I sit on a very functional board right now in Perth Amboy. And we, finance committee, they search that bill list and ask questions and do all those things. We're there now. But the ways that the policies and laws are set up, even with shared governance, right? As board members, I can't just show up to the high school like, hey guys, I'm here to walk around and make sure. That has to be done through the superintendent's office. You have to get cleared through that. We can't just show up in mass to certain events. With the exception of graduation, only a portion of us can be in one place at one time, because they would consider that quorum and a meeting that is, So there are some legislation, but I believe that it is not given to accountability in the ways that maybe we do need our governing bodies to be able to hold accountable. They know we're showing up when we're coming. They know well in advance that we're coming. So you can't just kind of drop in. It's not. It just doesn't work that way. The law does not allow for accountability to happen on that wise.
I have to say, I have had board members come to the school, and again, it is through the superintendent's office that they will come in, and some have participated in programs. So, but I think you all raise a wonderful point, because again, it's important that you have a overarching view of what we need, in terms of the educational process. I think Perth Amboy is blessed to have you, Dr. Brown, because you've been in education. So you're at the table. And as I listen to this, I think it's important that people like yourself are at the table, at the board level, at the state level, at the federal level. We have to be at the table to challenge and to help people see it differently. Because we can make an assumption that people understand and they know, but unless you're at the table to help change the perspective and engage in that conversation, even the things that you were sharing tonight in terms of the salary structure, got to be at the table in order to begin to have those, to create that awareness. I think the first step is the awareness, because we've talked about a lot of things tonight. The challenge now for us is, well, what's next? What do? We have, intellectualized it, of course, but tomorrow when I go to school, what do I do? Because at the end of the day, it really is about the child. And when kids know when you're present and you make a difference in your life with relationships, I keep coming back to that. I want to share this quick story, and it's I had a little kindergartner. I had gone into the classroom that Monday. That Wednesday, I was told that his father had died from COVID. Sunday after Thanksgiving, Christmas, I went to the funeral home. The kid was crying. He was just crying in his mother's lap as he saw his father there dead for the first time. He turned around and he looks at me. He absolutely stops crying and asks me, "How did you find me?" That was life-changing for me, because with everything I had gone through, Dr. Brown, I had gone through some stuff to get there for that kid. And that's the thing. We need to show up for our kids, because you know what happens now? Every time I see that kid, he wants to make sure, and I know that I can make a difference in his educational journey. And that's the thing. With everything that we've talked about tonight, how can I mobilize myself to be a better school? That's what I have to do. I have to take and glean from the things that you all have shared with me. Because I've sat with you, I'm a better educator. I will think about things differently. I will challenge differently. So it has to be a call into action. What's my next step as a principal, as an educator, as a minister, to help people understand, to direct people to listen at this, to continue to have these forums, because it's educational. So I thank you all.
Almost dropped the mic on that one. Anyone else want to jump in? Just kind of, I mean, we talked about so much. We didn't get heavily into kind of funding formulas and you know, how do we have that call to action around resources? That I don't know. I know we don't have enough time for that, but you know, those are there's so much that we need to think about. You know, there's so much. I'm overwhelmed in terms of just where do we go from here? But I do agree that if we don't keep the awareness and the conversations happening and the courage to have the conversations, you know, even those of us that are in the system heavily, like myself and you, Powell, if we don't have the courage to jump on here and say, you know what, we're in the system and some of the stuff in the system is just not right.
Oh, absolutely.
Then, you know, because I'm one that believes, right, I don't remember who said it, but it's top down and grassroots, right? It's change from without and within. And you know, you need prophets that's yelling at the king, but you do need a few prophets every now and then that's in the king's court.
Absolutely.
Go for it. Mm-hmm.
It's the Black church and the kind of call to action. The work that Dr. Francois is doing. I think partnerships are important. Absolutely. That we don't have to reinvent wheels, but if we all get behind the same wheel that aligns with principles and aligns with mission, then we have a more united front. I also think, and this is something that I've been processing for a couple of years, about the Black church, because we need the Black church. It is indeed still the last vestige of hope for our people, because these conversations are not being had anywhere else. But that we've also got to do the work of being incubators for leadership. And not just kind of incubators or these wombs that nurture and produce and develop and empower leaders for the church, but we're also doing it for civic engagement. That you know, the same way that we'll see a little kid and say, you got a head like a preacher, that we say, you know what, let me equip you with the skills, right? Understanding of what it takes to campaign, what it takes to do public speaking, how to rally, how to develop a platform, how to, you know, speak truth to power, so that they can do this work beyond the walls of the church. And so that early on, we have a reservoir, repository of people who can lead in high places, and that it doesn't happen just kind of by default, but that we are grooming our people, and that the Black church, I think, is a wonderful place to begin to develop that leadership pipeline that's not just about being pastors and preachers, but also about being leaders out in the world, in strategic places, in business and government, the places that really do end up shaping policy and funding, right? Policy as well. But we begin to be intentional about developing those leaders early.
And can I just add, just because of some conversations that I've had in the fraternal world, that we also in our churches teach early not to allow our civic engagement to be bought by those who claim that they need a drum major for diversity, if I could put it that way. Don't pay off my silence. And you know, that there is this undercurrent potentially in our communities that sometimes we're paid off for our silence. That a good gift from a certain corporation will afford us to be a little more tolerant of things that we know just aren't right. And I think that we have to add on, get back to that in our churches, that, you know, we have to raise up these leaders and teach them not to sell out. Because otherwise our progress is always going to stop at a certain point. And typically whenever our progress stops at a certain point, we always regress. It never picks up where we left off. Anyone else want to jump in kind of where are we with our call to actions? Where are some next steps?
Well, I think a call to action for all of us, right, and for the people that we have influence over, is to is, I think, as Dr. Powell said, awareness, right? Is to raise awareness. And I'm so grateful to Dr. Glover for this type of panel and this type of forum that will go out and raise awareness in so many different ways. And also for us to make sure that that we are pushing and voting, right? And in our conversations, be they for all of us preachers, right, in sermonic presentation, or in teaching, and right to show the relevance of scripture for all that we've talked about, right? There is a biblical basis for all of these matters, right? And so that we ought to be highlighting that from scripture, especially in the Black church, to show that there is biblical basis and really a mandate for our activity to do the work that we can do to change the systemic evils that are in place. And also for all of us, I think we need to be encouraged not to give up, right? Because doing this work can feel like you are running up against a brick wall, and that, you know, you're wasting your breath when you're talking, and that your energy and your efforts are going all for naught. But if we can all just be encouraged to know that that no matter if you feel like it's making progress, that if you're speaking up and you're doing it for the betterment of the children, for the betterment of the teachers and staff who are educating our children, that it's making some type of difference, and that we have to keep speaking up, keep showing up, keep voting, so that we can eventually see a change that occurs. And also, Dr. Glover did send us a bunch of articles, and one of them that I need to do more work in reading and understanding was the article that talked about 4 ways reparations can address racial inequality in education by Webmaster. And I know we don't have time to talk about it, but I do think it is vitally important that these 4 ways at least be listed, be mentioned, and then hopefully it'll spark others to go to this article and also to read more, right? One is that tax rebates to Black homeowners, and I'm sure all of us would who are Black and own a home would love to see that happen, especially those who have kids, children in education, children in the school system. 2 is closing racial gaps in school district revenues. 3 is change how race factors into school aid formulas. And the 4th way is that we eliminate racism in school finance formulas. And so definitely, I think that if nothing else, that we all ought to read this article and reference it by Webmaster, October 1st, 2021, to really begin to understand how and give voice to it also. Because I think if we can grasp it and understand it, we can give voice to it, and hopefully that giving voice to it will change so that school districts and schools with Black and brown in impoverished neighborhoods can also find that their kids have equal access to resources, and that the teachers are more free to educate the children in the way that they need to be educated. Thanks.
We talked a bit about the massive segregation in our schools, and how New Jersey is home to many apartheid schools, schools that have 90% plus of one particular racial group, and that is a part of the legacy of Plessy that has not been undone. And I think it's important to name that when we talk about ending school segregation, we're not having a conversation about diversity, and diversity is important, but this is also a conversation, if not more so, a conversation about power, more so a conversation about access to opportunity, a conversation about what repair actually looks like, because there are children whose lives are being damned as a result of a failed system that stopped stockpiles lives in certain communities and closes doors and walls off opportunity to wealth and opportunity to progress. And so as a call to action, I'm excited and grateful that on Thursday, August 25th, Dr. Glover and the St. Paul Church in Montclair are hosting a community forum where at 7 p.m., where we will be wrestling with these issues of what does segregation in schools mean today, and what kind of policy remedy can we develop that can be passed in our legislature and signed by our governor. So I'm excited about this community forum that's happening on Thursday, August 25th at the St. Paul Church in Montclair at 7 o'clock, so that we can, as a community, workshop these ideas and then use our collective power to bring power to its knees so that this state can actually be the state that it claims it is on paper.
Awesome. So I think we are preparing to close this meeting. In this time of sharing, thank everyone that has tuned in. Thank our panelists for joining us today. I just think we need to remember, for as great as America is and as progressive as New Jersey claims to be, both are still flawed. However, as long as we continue to bring awareness and understand the power of education to change the world, that we will ultimately get, I believe, to where we're trying to be. And that is that our children, regardless of color, regardless of socioeconomic background, will have access to be all that they desire to be. So God bless you all. Thank you for tuning in with us.
Thank you. Thank you.